Emily Carter had always believed her life was perfect, or at least close enough to it that any cracks were invisible to the naked eye. Married to Andrew for 22 years, they had built a life most people envied. Their sprawling home in the suburbs, two bright and accomplished children, and Emily's flourishing dental clinic, which Andrew had gifted her on their 10th anniversary, were all evidence of their shared success. Emily was beautiful in a way that was effortless. Thick chestnut hair pulled into a sleek bun, piercing green eyes, and a poised, understated elegance that radiated competence. As the head dentist of her clinic, she commanded respect and admiration. Yet in her own home, she had quietly transitioned into the role of caretaker. Over time, the wild, passionate spark that had once consumed her and Andrew seemed to fade, replaced by polite routines and predictable silences. She attributed Andrew's emotional distance to stress. He was, after all, running a successful finance firm and managing their investments. Still, there were moments, small ones, that gnawed at her. The nights he stayed up late in his home office, the way he pulled away when she reached for his hand during dinner, or how he barely noticed when she wore her favorite dress, one that used to make his eyes light up. But Emily, ever pragmatic and logical, told herself it was the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. Then came Olivia. The Carters hired Olivia 6 months ago as a nanny to help around the house. Emily, juggling the clinic and their busy household, thought it was a sensible decision. Olivia was a young, vivacious 24-year-old with honey blonde hair, an infectious laugh, and a knack for charming everyone, including Emily's teenage daughter, Sophie, and college-bound son, Ethan. She was good at her job, Emily reasoned, and that was what mattered. Still, Emily couldn't shake an odd feeling about her presence. Andrew seemed lighter around Olivia. There were fleeting moments when Emily caught his gaze lingering on the nanny just a beat too long, or heard laughter echoing from his office when Olivia brought him a cup of coffee. But Emily brushed it off as her imagination, the musings of a woman who hadn't felt truly desired in years. That is, until the night she couldn't ignore it anymore. It started like any other evening. Emily had returned home from a late shift at the clinic, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she entered their grand foyer. She glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m. The house was unusually quiet, save for the faint hum of music drifting from Andrew's office. Assuming he was working, she headed upstairs to check on Sophie, who had fallen asleep in her room. Ethan was away at college for winter break, leaving the house unusually subdued. She descended the staircase to kiss Andrew goodnight, but froze in her tracks as she neared the office door. It was ajar, just enough to reveal a sliver of what was happening inside. What she saw sent her world crashing down. There was Andrew, seated in his leather chair, with Olivia perched on his lap. They were locked in a heated embrace, their hands exploring each other with a hunger Emily hadn't seen in years. It wasn't a fleeting mistake or a moment of weakness. It was raw, deliberate passion. Emily's breath hitched, her chest tightening with a mix of disbelief and rage. She stepped back silently, her heels threatening to betray her presence, and retreated to the safety of the darkened hallway. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her ears as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. The perfect life she thought she had was nothing more than a fragile facade. Emily sat on the edge of her bed that night, the image of Andrew and Olivia burned into her mind. She had always prided herself on her ability to stay calm under pressure. But this was something else entirely. Her heart ached, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that she had been blind to the growing divide in her marriage. She couldn't sleep. Instead, she replayed every interaction with Andrew over the past 6 months. Every shared glance between him and Olivia. Every moment that seemed harmless but now felt like a lie. How long had this been going on? Was it just physical or something deeper? Questions swirled in her mind like a storm, but the answers felt out of reach. The next morning, Emily decided she needed proof. If she confronted Andrew now, he would deny it, she was sure. He was too clever to admit guilt without evidence. So she began to watch, quietly and carefully. Over the following days, Emily noticed the subtle tells she had missed before. The way Andrew lingered when Olivia spoke, The private smiles exchanged when they thought no one was looking. The texts Andrew would send from his phone, always angled slightly away from her line of sight. And then there was Olivia. She had started dressing differently, more form-fitting clothes, a touch more makeup. Emily caught her humming to herself as she worked, a smugness in her demeanor that hadn't been there before. Emily hated to admit it, but Olivia was stunning. She was everything Emily wasn't. Young, carefree, and unburdened by the weight of 2 decades of marriage and motherhood. It wasn't until Emily checked Andrew's calendar that she found her first real clue. He had a meeting scheduled at 3 p.m., but when Emily called his office to discuss an unrelated matter, his assistant mentioned he had left for the day. That evening, Emily pretended to be engrossed in a book as Andrew strolled through the door at 7 p.m., his hair slightly disheveled and his shirt untucked. "Long meeting?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. He froze for a fraction of a second before recovering. "Yeah, ran over. Sorry I'm late." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily it made Emily's stomach churn. But she said nothing, simply nodding and returning her attention to the book, though she couldn't make sense of a single word on the page. Her suspicions were confirmed when she found a receipt in Andrew's coat pocket the next day. It was for a wine bar downtown, dated the same afternoon as his so-called meeting. 2 glasses of red, 1 appetizer. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the slip of paper. It was small, almost insignificant, yet it felt like a dagger to the heart. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. That evening, Emily waited until the children were in their rooms before confronting Andrew. She sat across from him in the living room, her back straight and her hands folded neatly in her lap. A picture of composure, though her insides were in turmoil. "We need to talk," she began, her voice steady but cold. Andrew looked up from his phone, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "What's wrong?" Emily held up the receipt. "This, and the lies, and the late nights in your office with Olivia." Andrew's expression darkened, but he quickly composed himself. "Emily, it's not what you think. Don't insult me," she snapped, her voice rising for the first time. "I saw you, Andrew. In your office. With her." His face drained of color. For a moment, he seemed to be searching for an excuse, some way to talk his way out of it. But then he slumped back in his chair, defeated. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "It got out of hand." Emily stared at him, her heart pounding. "How long?" Andrew hesitated, then sighed. "A few months." Her world crumbled. Months. While she was working late nights at the clinic, caring for their children, keeping their home in order, he had been sneaking around with the nanny. The betrayal cut deeper than she thought possible. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you love her?" "No," Andrew said quickly, almost too quickly. "It's not like that. It was just physical." Emily laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. "Just physical? Do you realize what you've done? To me? To this family?" Andrew had no response. He sat there, staring at his hands, as Emily's words hung in the air. The days following the confrontation were a blur for Emily. She went through the motions of her life, but everything felt hollow. At the clinic, her staff noticed her distracted demeanor, though no one dared to ask what was wrong. At home, she kept things as normal as possible for Sophie and Ethan, careful not to let her heartbreak seep into their lives, at least not yet. But the nights were unbearable. Alone in the quiet of her bedroom, Emily replayed Andrew's confession over and over. "It just got out of hand." The words felt like a cruel understatement, a feeble excuse for the wreckage he had caused. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers to the questions that plagued her. What did she do wrong? Why wasn't she enough? Anger came in waves, sharp and consuming, but it was the sadness that lingered, settling deep in her bones. She thought about the early days of their marriage. How Andrew used to look at her like she was the only woman in the world. How he used to hold her hand even when they were just sitting on the couch watching TV. When had that changed? When had she become invisible to him? Her self-doubt was a relentless voice in her head. She scrutinized herself in the mirror one morning, searching for flaws. Her figure was still trim, her skin well cared for. She was beautiful. She knew that objectively. But Olivia's youth was a weapon Emily couldn't compete with. She hated herself for comparing, but she couldn't stop. And then there was the humiliation. The thought that Olivia, the nanny Emily had trusted to care for her children, had betrayed her in such an intimate way. She couldn't bring herself to look at Olivia, let alone speak to her, though the young woman still moved around the house as if nothing had happened. Emily seethed every time she heard Olivia's cheerful laugh, knowing the woman was laughing at her, mocking her behind her back. Andrew tried, in his clumsy way, to patch things up. He offered apologies that felt hollow, platitudes about how it was a mistake and how he didn't want to lose her. He suggested therapy, saying they could work through it together. But Emily couldn't even look at him without feeling a mix of rage and sorrow. "I need time," she told him one night when he pressed her for an answer. "Don't ask me for anything right now. Just give me time." Emily decided she couldn't move forward without knowing the full extent of the affair. She needed answers, even if they hurt. So, one evening when Andrew was out, she searched his office. She felt like an intruder in her own home, rifling through his drawers and files, but she couldn't stop. It wasn't long before she found what she was looking for, a hidden folder on his desk computer labeled private. It was password protected, but Andrew wasn't as clever as he thought. After a few tries, she guessed the password: Olivia's birthday. The folder was a treasure trove of evidence. Emails exchanged at all hours of the day, some flirtatious, others overtly sexual. Photos of them together, at the wine bar, at the beach, even in the apartment Emily didn't know Olivia had. There were plans for weekends away, details about dinners, and explicit texts that made Emily's stomach churn. What hurt most wasn't the physicality of it all. It was the intimacy. The way Andrew shared pieces of himself with Olivia that he hadn't shared with Emily in years. He had confided in Olivia, laughed with her, made plans with her, as if she were his partner, not his wife. Emily closed the folder and sat back in Andrew's chair numb. The betrayal was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just a fling. It was a second life he had been living, one that had no room for her, fueled by a need for closure, or perhaps just an outlet for her pain. Emily decided to confront Olivia directly. She waited until Andrew was out of the house and drove to the address she had found in the emails. It was a modest apartment in the city, far from the luxurious life Olivia lived in their home. When Olivia opened the door, her confident smile faltered. "Mrs. Carter," she said, feigning surprise. "What are you doing here?" Emily stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Olivia's demeanor shifted. She crossed her arms, leaning casually against the wall. "About what?" Emily's voice was steady, but her words were sharp. "You know exactly what. How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" Olivia didn't deny it. Instead, she smirked, a hint of arrogance in her expression. "Does it matter? You already know." Emily's hand twitched with the urge to slap her, but she restrained herself. "You destroyed my family," she said, her voice breaking. "Why? What did I ever do to you?" Olivia shrugged. "It wasn't personal. Andrew was bored. I was there. That's all." The casual cruelty of her words stunned Emily. She realized then that Olivia felt no remorse, no guilt. For her, this was just another game she had won. Emily turned on her heel and walked out, her head held high even as tears blurred her vision. But as she drove home, she realized this wasn't just Olivia's fault. Andrew had chosen this. He had chosen to betray her, to risk everything they had built for a fleeting thrill. Emily sat alone in the living room that night, the silence around her heavy with questions. Her confrontation with Olivia had only confirmed what she already knew. There was no salvaging what Andrew had done. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that he had risked their entire life together for someone as cold and calculating as Olivia. The next morning, Emily woke up with a new resolve. She couldn't wallow in her pain anymore. She needed to take control. The first step was ensuring her children were protected from the fallout. Sophie was perceptive, and Emily knew it wouldn't be long before her daughter started piecing things together, if she hadn't already. Ethan, though older, still needed stability during his college years. Emily decided it was time to consult a lawyer. She needed to understand her options, both financially and legally, before making any decisions about her marriage. Andrew had given her the clinic as a gift, but she wanted to ensure that her livelihood wouldn't be entangled in whatever messy situation lay ahead. Later that week, during one of Andrew's late-night absences, Emily met with a highly recommended family lawyer, Caroline Porter. Caroline was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being ruthless when it came to protecting her clients. "You have every right to be angry," Caroline said after Emily recounted the situation. "But anger isn't going to win this for you. Strategy will. Let's talk about what you want." Emily thought about it for a long moment. "I want what's best for my children," she said finally. "And I want to make sure I don't lose what I've worked for. The clinic, my reputation. I can't let Andrew destroy that." Caroline nodded. "We'll start there. Do you want to file for divorce immediately, or do you need time to think?" Emily hesitated. The idea of divorce felt like admitting defeat, like the ultimate failure of everything she had worked so hard to build. But staying in a marriage where she was disrespected and betrayed seemed just as impossible. "I'm not ready to file," she admitted. "Not yet, but I need to be prepared." "Understood," Caroline said. "We'll put together everything you need to protect yourself. In the meantime, document everything, every interaction with him, every financial decision he makes, everything you can about the affair." Emily left the meeting feeling a glimmer of empowerment. She still didn't know what her future would look like, but for the first time since her world had crumbled, she felt like she had some control. Emily sat alone in the living room that night, the silence around her heavy with questions. Her confrontation with Olivia had only confirmed what she already knew. There was no salvaging what Andrew had done. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that he had risked their entire life together for someone as cold and calculating as Olivia. The next morning, Emily woke up with a new resolve. She couldn't wallow in her pain anymore. She needed to take control. The first step was ensuring her children were protected from the fallout. Sophie was perceptive, and Emily knew it wouldn't be long before her daughter started piecing things together if she hadn't already. Ethan, though older, still needed stability during his college years. Emily decided it was time to consult a lawyer. She needed to understand her options, both financially and legally, before making any decisions about her marriage. Andrew had given her the clinic as a gift, but she wanted to ensure that her livelihood wouldn't be entangled in whatever messy situation lay ahead. Later that week, during one of Andrew's late-night absences, Emily met with a highly recommended family lawyer, Caroline Porter. Caroline was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being ruthless when it came to protecting her clients. "You have every right to be angry," Caroline said after Emily recounted the situation. "But anger isn't going to win this for you. Strategy will. Let's talk about what you want." Emily thought about it for a long moment. "I want what's best for my children," she said finally. "And I want to make sure I don't lose what I've worked for. The clinic, my reputation. I can't let Andrew destroy that." Caroline nodded. "We'll start there. Do you want to file for divorce immediately, or do you need time to think?" Emily hesitated. The idea of divorce felt like admitting defeat, like the ultimate failure of everything she had worked so hard to build. But staying in a marriage where she was disrespected and betrayed seemed just as impossible. "I'm not ready to file," she admitted. "Not yet, but I need to be prepared." "Understood," Caroline said. "We'll put together everything you need to protect yourself. In the meantime, document everything, every interaction with him, every financial decision he makes, everything you can about the affair." Emily left the meeting feeling a glimmer of empowerment. She still didn't know what her future would look like, but for the first time since her world had crumbled, she felt like she had some control. Emily knew the time had come to speak with her children. Sophie, in particular, had started asking questions about the growing tension in the house. Andrew had been avoiding Emily as much as she had been avoiding him, and it didn't take a genius to sense that something was wrong. One evening, after Andrew had gone to his office for yet another meeting, Emily gathered Sophie and Ethan in the living room. Sophie curled up on the couch with her phone, while Ethan, home for winter break, looked up from his laptop with a raised eyebrow. "What's going on, Mom?" Ethan asked. "You look serious." Emily took a deep breath. She had practiced this conversation in her mind 100 times, but the words still felt heavy on her tongue. "There's something I need to tell you both," she began. Something about your father and me. Sophie's expression turned cautious. Are you getting divorced? Emily hesitated. We're not there yet, she said carefully. But your father has made some choices that have hurt our family. Choices that I'm still trying to process. Ethan frowned. What kind of choices? Emily debated how much to share. She didn't want to burden them with too many details, but she also didn't want to sugarcoat the situation. He's been unfaithful, she said finally. With Olivia. Sophie's eyes widened. The nanny, she said, her voice rising. Are you kidding me? Ethan's jaw tightened. That's messed up, Mom. Does he even realize what he's done to you? To us? I'm sure he does, Emily said softly. But I need you both to understand something. This isn't your fault. None of this is because of you. And no matter what happens between your father and me, we both love you very much. Sophie looked like she was on the verge of tears, but she quickly masked it with anger. How can you even stay here with him? How can you not kick him out? It's complicated, Emily said, her voice trembling. But I promise you, I'm figuring it out. I just need you to trust me. Ethan nodded solemnly. We trust you, Mom, but I can't say the same for him. Sophie didn't say anything, but the look of betrayal in her eyes spoke volumes. As Emily navigated the emotional minefield of her family's unraveling, she found support in an unlikely place. Ethan. Though he had always been closer to Andrew, her son seemed to step into a protective role almost overnight. Let me know if you need anything, he told her one evening after dinner. Seriously, Mom? I mean it. His words brought tears to Emily's eyes. For so long, she had carried the weight of the family's well-being on her shoulders. But now, for the first time, someone was offering to share the burden. Ethan's presence became a quiet comfort to Emily in the weeks that followed. While Sophie vacillated between anger and sadness, throwing sharp remarks Andrew's way whenever they crossed paths, Ethan offered calm and steady support. He didn't ask too many questions, didn't demand answers she wasn't ready to give, but he was there, watching, listening, and ready to step in when she needed him. One evening, Ethan found Emily sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of tea that had gone cold. He placed his laptop on the counter and pulled out a chair next to her. Mom, he said gently, can I ask you something? She looked at him, her face lined with exhaustion. Of course. Why are you still here? He asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. After everything Dad's done, why are you staying? Emily sighed, the weight of his question pressing down on her. It's not that simple, Ethan. I have to think about you and Sophie, about the clinic, about everything we've built. I can't just walk away without a plan. He nodded, absorbing her words. I get that, but I want you to know, you don't have to keep doing this alone. Sophie and I, we're not kids anymore. We can handle the truth, even if it's ugly. Emily reached out and took his hand, her eyes welling with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. Ethan smiled faintly. You don't have to find out. In the days that followed, Ethan began to quietly help Emily in small but meaningful ways. He took over driving Sophie to school and extracurriculars, giving Emily space to breathe. He ran errands for the clinic when she was overwhelmed, and even sat with her to review the financial documents Caroline had asked her to prepare. One afternoon, as they went through a stack of old receipts and account statements, Ethan frowned. Mom, look at this, he said, holding up a credit card statement. Emily leaned in, her brow furrowing as she scanned the list of charges. Most were familiar, groceries, utilities, clinic expenses, but one entry caught her attention. It was a charge for a jewelry store downtown, dated just 2 weeks before their anniversary. Dad never gave you jewelry for your anniversary, did he? Ethan asked quietly. Emily shook her head, her stomach twisting. No. He said he didn't have time to shop. Ethan's expression darkened. Then who was it for? Emily didn't need to ask. She already knew. The discovery of the jewelry purchase marked a turning point for Emily. It wasn't just the affair itself that hurt. It was the lies, the blatant disrespect, the way Andrew had treated her as if she were blind and naive. She realized that staying silent, trying to keep the peace for the sake of the family, was no longer an option. The next evening, Emily confronted Andrew once more. this time in their bedroom. She held the credit card statement in her hand, her eyes blazing with determination. "Who was the necklace for?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. Andrew looked up from his phone, startled. "What are you talking about?" Emily tossed the statement onto the bed. "This jewelry store. 2 weeks before our anniversary. You didn't buy it for me, so who was it for?" Andrew's face paled, and for a moment, Emily thought he might deny it. But then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It was for Olivia," he admitted. "It was her birthday." Her stomach churned, but she refused to let him see her pain. "You spent our money on her," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" "I wasn't thinking," Andrew said, his tone defensive. "It was just a gift, Emily. It didn't mean anything." "That's the problem, Andrew," she shot back. "Nothing you've done seems to mean anything to you. Not me, not this family, not the life we built together." Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but Emily held up a hand. "Don't," she said firmly. "I'm done listening to your excuses." She turned and left the room, slamming the door behind her. For the first time, she felt a spark of clarity. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep living like this. Emily sat in the quiet sanctuary of her clinic's office the next morning, staring out at the city skyline. The confrontation with Andrew had left her shaken but resolute. She couldn't stay in a marriage where she was disrespected, humiliated, and disregarded. Yet leaving wasn't just a decision for herself. It was a decision that would impact her children, her business, and the life she had spent decades building. Caroline's words echoed in her mind. "Strategy will win this for you." Emily realized she needed to stop reacting emotionally and start thinking strategically. She was a successful professional, a capable woman who had built her career from the ground up. She could apply that same focus and determination to reclaiming her life. Her first step was securing her financial independence. She called Caroline and requested a thorough review of their joint assets. Emily wanted to understand exactly where she stood, from their savings accounts to the clinic's ownership structure. If a divorce became inevitable, she needed to ensure she wouldn't lose what she had worked so hard to achieve. The second step was setting boundaries in her home. That evening, after the children were asleep, she found Andrew in the living room. He looked up at her as she entered, his face weary. "Emily," he started, but she cut him off. "I'm not here to fight," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I need to set some rules." Andrew frowned, but nodded for her to continue. "Until I figure out what comes next, I want you to move into the guest bedroom," she said. "You've broken my trust, and I can't pretend otherwise in front of the kids. But for their sake, I don't want this to turn into a war zone." Andrew opened his mouth to protest, but Emily held up a hand. "This isn't up for discussion. I'm giving you a chance to show some respect, Andrew. Don't waste it." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "I'll move my stuff tonight." Emily felt a mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't a victory. It was merely a step toward regaining her sense of self. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to carve out small spaces of freedom for herself. She spent more time at the clinic, immersing herself in her work. Patients and staff noticed her renewed energy, though none knew the turmoil she was masking beneath her professional facade. On weekends, she took Sophie and Ethan on outings, just the three of them. Whether it was a movie night, a hike in the nearby hills, or a simple lunch at their favorite cafe, Emily cherished these moments. They felt like a reminder of the life she could have without Andrew's shadow looming over her. One Saturday, while Ethan was out with friends, Emily and Sophie went shopping at a local boutique. As they browsed the racks of dresses and accessories, Sophie hesitated, then turned to her mother. "Mom," she said quietly, "are you going to leave Dad?" Emily paused, her hands resting on a soft cashmere sweater. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know things can't stay the way they are." Sophie nodded, her expression somber. "I just want you to be happy," she said. "You deserve that." Emily smiled and pulled her daughter into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "That means more to me than you know." Emily's growing sense of empowerment was tested one afternoon when Ethan approached her with a grim expression. He handed her his phone, where a message thread was open. It was a group chat between some of his friends, and Olivia's name appeared more than once. "What is this?" Emily asked, her stomach tightening. Ethan took a deep breath. "I didn't want to show you this, but you need to know. Olivia's been bragging about the affair to some of her friends. One of them sent this to me." Emily scrolled through the messages, her hands trembling. Olivia had been boasting about her power over Andrew, mocking Emily as a naive wife, and even hinting that she had plans to manipulate Andrew into leaving Emily entirely. Fury erupted within her, but beneath it was a deep, aching hurt. Olivia's cruelty went beyond betrayal. It was calculated, intentional, and vicious. "Thank you for showing me this," Emily said, her voice trembling but steady. "I'll handle it." Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Mom. Whatever happens, we're with you." Emily sat in her bedroom that night, the weight of Olivia's messages pressing heavily on her chest. Reading those words, seeing her life mocked and manipulated, stoked a fire inside her she hadn't felt in years. She had tried to be the composed, reserved woman she always prided herself on being, but this demanded action. The next morning, Emily met with Caroline at her office, the screenshots from Ethan's phone in hand. Caroline reviewed the messages carefully, her expression hardening as she read. "This is gold," she said, setting the phone down. "Not only does this give us concrete evidence of the affair, but it also shows Olivia's intent to manipulate the situation for her benefit. If this goes to court, it'll work in your favor." Emily nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. "What's the next step?" Caroline leaned back in her chair. "We need to document everything. You've already done a great job gathering evidence, but we need to stay ahead. Financial records, proof of any gifts Andrew purchased for her, and anything else that shows he misused family assets. I want Olivia out of my house," Emily said firmly. "I can't stand to see her every day, acting like she's done nothing wrong." Caroline gave a small smile. "We can handle that. Legally, since she's an employee and lives in your home, you have the right to terminate her position. I suggest doing it sooner rather than later." The idea of finally confronting Olivia gave Emily a strange sense of satisfaction. "I'll do it today." That evening, after dinner, Emily found Olivia in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She stood tall, her voice calm but laced with authority. "Olivia, can I speak with you privately?" Olivia looked up, startled by the sharpness in Emily's tone. "Of course," she said, following Emily into the study. Once the door closed, Emily turned to face her, her green eyes blazing with restrained fury. "I know everything," she said, placing Ethan's phone on the desk. The screen was lit with the incriminating messages. Olivia's face turned pale, but she quickly tried to recover, her lips curling into a nervous smile. "Mrs. Carter, I can explain." "No," Emily interrupted, her voice cutting through Olivia's excuses. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify what you've done. You've betrayed this family, humiliated me, and mocked everything I've worked for. And now you're done." Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but Emily held up a hand. "Your employment here is terminated effective immediately. You'll pack your things tonight and leave. I've already contacted a driver to take you wherever you need to go." "You can't do this," Olivia said, her voice trembling with indignation. "Andrew won't. Andrew has no say in this," Emily snapped. "This is my house, and as far as I'm concerned, you've overstayed your welcome." For a moment, Olivia looked as though she might argue, but then she seemed to think better of it. Her face twisted into a sneer. "You think this makes you strong? Kicking me out? It doesn't change anything." Emily stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "It changes everything. You wanted to destroy my life, but you've underestimated me. You don't get to win here." The tension in the Carter household was palpable by the time Andrew returned home that evening. Emily sat in the living room, her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She could hear the soft sounds of Olivia packing upstairs and the murmur of Sophie's music drifting from her room. Ethan sat across from her, silent but supportive, his presence grounding her. When Andrew walked through the door, His face showed surprise at the sight of his wife and son waiting for him. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone wary. Emily stood, her green eyes locking onto his. "I fired Olivia," she said simply. Andrew froze, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "What? Why would you do that?" Emily took a deep breath, her voice calm but unyielding. "Because I know everything, Andrew. I know about the affair. I know about the gifts. And I know about her bragging to her friends about how she's been manipulating you and mocking me." Andrew's face turned pale, and for a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Emily, I told you it was a mistake." It wasn't just a mistake," Emily interrupted, her voice sharp. "It was a deliberate choice. Over and over again, you chose her over this family. And now you're going to face the consequences." Andrew glanced at Ethan, who was glaring at him with barely concealed disdain. "Can we at least talk about this privately?" Andrew asked, his voice lowering. Emily nodded. "Fine, let's talk." They moved to the study, the same room where Emily had confronted Olivia just hours earlier. The remnants of that confrontation still lingered. The phone with incriminating messages sat on the desk, a silent witness to the chaos. "Why now?" Andrew asked, his voice tense. "Why fire her like this? You could have talked to me first." Emily's laughter was cold and bitter. "Talk to you? Like you've been honest with me? Like you've respected me? You lost the right to be consulted when you decided to sleep with our children's nanny." Andrew's jaw tightened. "I already told you it didn't mean anything." "Stop saying that," Emily snapped, her composure finally cracking. "It meant something to her. She thought she had power over me, over our family. And you gave her that power, Andrew. You made her believe she was untouchable." Andrew's shoulders sagged. "What do you want me to say, Emily? That I screwed up? That I'm sorry?" "I am. I've said that. But what more do you want from me?" Emily stared at him, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "I want you to understand that this isn't just about the affair. It's about the lies, the betrayal, the disrespect. You've broken something that can't be fixed with an apology." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily turned and walked to the door. "Olivia will be gone by the time you wake up tomorrow. And as for us, I don't know yet, but don't expect me to forgive and forget." As she left the room, Andrew sank into the chair behind the desk, his head in his hands. Emily's smirk faded into determination as she explained her next steps to Caroline. The plan wasn't just about removing Olivia from their lives. It was about reclaiming her sense of control and ensuring Andrew understood the full weight of his actions. The first step was clear: Olivia had to leave their home. The following morning, Emily called Olivia into the kitchen while Andrew was at work. Olivia sauntered in with her usual smugness, clearly assuming she held all the power. "Olivia," Emily began, her voice calm but steely, "your services are no longer required here. You'll need to pack your things and leave by the end of the day." Olivia's smile faltered, but she quickly masked her surprise. "I don't think Andrew would agree with that," she said, crossing her arms. Emily raised an eyebrow. "This isn't up for discussion. You've violated every boundary of decency in this home. I have more than enough reason to terminate your employment immediately." Olivia's smugness morphed into anger. "You can't just throw me out." "Oh, but I can," Emily said, stepping closer. "And I will. You've underestimated me, Olivia. I'm not the naive woman you've made me out to be." Before Olivia could respond, Emily pulled out her phone and displayed the screenshots of the group chat. "These? They're just the beginning. If you don't leave quietly, I'll make sure everyone sees the real you. And trust me, no respectable family will ever hire you again." Olivia's face turned pale. For the first time, she seemed genuinely nervous. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the kitchen. When Andrew returned home that evening, he found Emily waiting for him in the living room. Her posture was calm, but her eyes blazed with an intensity he hadn't seen in years. "Olivia's gone," she said simply. Andrew blinked, clearly caught off guard. "You fired her?" "Yes," Emily said. "And now we need to talk about what happens next." Andrew sat down cautiously, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Emily, I Save it, she interrupted. I'm done listening to excuses. You've destroyed the trust in this marriage, humiliated me, and put our family at risk. You need to decide right now. Are you willing to do the work to fix this, or is this the end? Andrew hesitated, his expression conflicted. I want to fix it, he said finally. I know I've made mistakes, but I don't want to lose you. Emily stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind. She wanted to believe him, but the pain of his betrayal was still fresh. Then you'll do exactly what I say. Therapy, full transparency, and no more lies. If you can't commit to that, we're done. Andrew nodded solemnly. I'll do whatever it takes. The weeks that followed were tense, but productive. Andrew began attending therapy, both alone and with Emily. He handed over his phone and emails, giving her unrestricted access to his life. It was the bare minimum, but it was a start. Emily, meanwhile, continued to focus on herself. She expanded her role at the clinic, taking on new clients and attending industry conferences. She joined a yoga class, something she had always wanted to do, but never found the time for. Slowly, she began to feel like her own person again, separate from the confines of her marriage. Ethan and Sophie noticed the changes too. Sophie softened her anger toward Andrew, though she remained wary, while Ethan stepped into the role of a quiet protector, always checking in on Emily to make sure she was okay. But Emily wasn't content to stop there. She began building a contingency plan, ensuring her finances were airtight, her clinic was secure, and her future wouldn't depend on Andrew's whims. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet, but she was prepared to move forward, with or without him. Just as life began to settle into a tentative rhythm, Emily received an unexpected call. It was from a former patient, someone she hadn't seen in years, but had always admired for his kindness and intelligence. Emily, the voice on the other end said, I heard about what's been happening. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. The call left Emily shaken, not because of the offer, but because of the glimmer of hope it sparked in her. For the first time, she wondered if there could be a future for her beyond Andrew, a future where she didn't have to compromise her happiness for the sake of appearances. The morning of Andrew's departure felt surreal. Emily stood in the foyer, watching as he carried the last of his things to his car. The house, which had once felt too large for their family, now seemed cavernous in its silence. Sophie had retreated to her room, refusing to speak to Andrew, while Ethan lingered in the kitchen, his expression unreadable. Andrew turned to Emily as he set the last suitcase down. I'm sorry it came to this, he said, his voice low. I know I made mistakes, terrible ones, but I never stopped loving you. Emily met his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. You didn't love me, Andrew. You loved yourself. And that's why we're here. He flinched at her words, but didn't argue. Instead, he nodded, as if accepting her judgment. For what it's worth, I hope you find happiness. Emily didn't respond. She simply stood there as he walked out the door and into his car, driving away from the home they had shared for over 2 decades. Once he was gone, Emily allowed herself a deep breath. The weight she had been carrying for months seemed to lift, though it left behind a hollow ache. She had lost something precious, but in its place, she had found clarity. The house was unusually quiet that night, save for the soft hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Emily sat at the dining table with Sophie and Ethan, their plates barely touched. Sophie was the first to speak. Are you okay, Mom? She asked hesitantly. Emily looked up, her eyes softening as she smiled. I am, she said. It's hard, but it's the right thing. Ethan nodded, a flicker of pride in his expression. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. Emily's chest tightened at her son's words, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached out and took both their hands. We're going to be okay, she said, her voice steady. We'll figure this out together. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand. I'm glad you're not putting up with it anymore. You deserve better. For the first time in months, Emily felt a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she wasn't facing it alone. Months after Emily's confrontation with Andrew and Olivia, her life had shifted in ways she never thought possible. The divorce was finalized, and she retained full ownership of the clinic, the family home, and custody of Sophie, with Ethan visiting often from college. Andrew had moved to an apartment downtown, and Emily found she didn't miss his presence. Instead, she felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of freedom. The biggest change, however, wasn't external. It was within her. Emily had rediscovered herself. She was no longer just a wife, a mother, or the head dentist at her clinic. She was Emily, strong, intelligent, and resilient. She had started attending yoga classes and joined a book club, reconnecting with hobbies and interests she had neglected over the years. She even booked a solo trip to Italy, something she had always dreamed of but never dared to do. Sophie and Ethan thrived in the new environment. Sophie's initial anger had softened into admiration for her mother's courage. "You're amazing, Mom," Sophie told her one evening as they shared a quiet dinner. "I'm proud of you." Those words stayed with Emily, a testament to the strength she had shown not only for herself but for her children. As for Andrew, he had attempted to reconnect several times, offering apologies and hints at regret. But Emily remained firm. "We've both made our choices," she told him during their last conversation. "I've found peace, and I hope you do too." Olivia, predictably, faded into the background. Her manipulation and cruelty had left her with nothing but a tarnished reputation. Emily took solace in the knowledge that she had risen above the chaos Olivia had tried to create. Sitting on her porch one evening, a glass of wine in hand, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been broken, yes, but she had rebuilt herself stronger than before. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced her to confront truths she had long ignored. She had found clarity, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. To anyone else facing betrayal, Emily would offer this advice. It's okay to grieve, to feel anger and sadness. But don't let it consume you. Take your time, find your strength, and remember that your worth isn't defined by someone else's actions. You are capable of more than you realize. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a golden glow, Emily smiled. She had learned to let go of the past, embrace the present, and look forward to the future. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning.